Pyromancies are probably the most consistent spell type in all the Souls games. After doing a Pyromancy only marathon, it was very clear that it is extremely good in every game. I even did a Flame Sprayer run in Bloodborne as part of the marathon, and even that wasn't that bad. But for today, we are going to rank all the Pyromancy types from worst to best. Now yes, Demon Souls and Elden Ring don't technically have Pyromancies. There's no like Pyromancy flames needed to cast the spells, as it categorized as magic or incantations, but ranking the Pyromancies doesn't really mean much anyway, so we might as well include them. Starting off with Dark Souls 2. Now this one hurts me to put at the bottom, but it just has the most amount of negatives. But to start off with the good stuff, the Pyromancy Flame gets amazing base damage, so just leveling it up will actually result in great returns, and combined with the fact that Fire Seeds are very abundant to the point where you can easily get a maxed out Pyromancy Flame in the first half of the game. Also, the options that you get are just really good too. Great Chaos Fireball, Lingering Flame, Flame Swathe, Forbidden Sun, but funnily enough, the best Pyromancies are probably the ones that don't even deal just regular damage. Something like Warmth is probably just the best healing spell in the entire game. Things like Poison Mist, Toxic Mist are just a must-have. They proc those effects extremely quickly, and also Poison and Toxic are just broken. They do so much damage, they stack with each other, and almost every single enemy in the game can be procced with it. Only a handful of bosses are actually just immune. But probably the best thing about Pyromancy in this game is that none of the spells have requirements, and combined with the Pyromancy Flame damage mostly coming from weapon level and not the scalings, it makes for an amazing option to pair alongside strength or even dexterity builds. And also being that it actually does get a fire scaling, it actually has good flexibility with intelligence and faith. But unfortunately, that's where the positives end, because that fire scaling isn't that good, it is pretty poor. So just going into a dark build using hexes if you're expecting the faith and intelligence would just be better, because not only are you just getting more damage, but you also have better spells, and they're just more accessible. Most of the good Pyromancies are just locked towards a later part of the game, which unfortunately is where a lot of the bosses are just resist to fire, and this sucks especially because all of your Pyros deal pure fire damage, even Black Flame spells, which they didn't do pure fire damage in DS1 and DS3. But some of your best damaging spells, things like Fire Snake and Outcry, they're in the DLC. Outcry especially is annoying to get. Forbidden Sun is an Aldia's Keep. Great Chaos Fireball, you need to go to New Game Plus 2, unless you play a lot of PvP. Even the rings that boost fire damage are required later in the playthrough. So for the most part, you're just going to be stuck with some like mediocre spells, which can be okay if they had a good amount of casts, which they don't. Probably like the worst thing about Pyromancies in this game. They just have such low amount of casts to where you just need to have the Hex's Hood or High Attunement, or I'd probably just use the attunement glitch like you see in the gameplay, because honestly, it's egregious. Something like Forbidden Sun and Outcry only gets one cast, and you need like 90 something attunement just to get 3. Chaos Storm, Chaos Fireball, Flame Swathe, they only get 2 casts. Now I guess the reasoning behind all of this is that the game does have a bunch of items that can replenish casts, but the thing is, none of them can be bought infinitely. They're all finite items. You can only get a limited amount per playthrough unless you farm for them. But to rapid fire off some more negatives, the spells also consume so much stamina. Coming from Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1 where the spells didn't consume any stamina, and then playing this game where like a bread and butter spell like Great Combustion consumes like an entire stamina bar, it can get pretty annoying. Also, I just want to mention that this game just ruined Chaos Storm. Now yes, I know Outcry is like the better version of this, but in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 1, every single individual pillar just did max damage. But in this game, only like the first pillar that you hit with does max damage, and the other ones just do like a little bit amount of damage, which means that it's only going to be good for like crowd control and not really going to be that big boss melting machine that it used to be. But overall, Dark Souls 2 Pyromancies are very fun, and they can make the game a lot easier. Number 4, we have Demon Souls Pyromancies. Now, Demon Souls probably has the most imbalance between magic and weapons. Typically, spells and weapons are like just as good as one another, but in this game, no, it's just not the case. Magic is like 10 times better. Not only are you just going to be at a safe distance using these spells, but you're also going to be doing ridiculous damage, not consuming any stamina when attacking. Enemies hardly even dodge and input read the projectiles. Spells don't even have requirements. Also, catalysts don't even need upgrading. And there's plenty of rings and weapons that can boost your damage. But to talk about Pyromancies specifically, even though there's no Pyro category and they all fall under magic, but they're obviously still really good, just use Firestorm. That's it. Just use Firestorm. Like, look at this shit. It shouldn't be allowed. Look how much damage it's doing. And you get this spell like a third of the way through the game. Now, you might be wondering, how is Demon Souls going to get lower on the list if Firestorm is doing this much damage? And that's because it's kind of boring. I mean, like, not really. But, like, to be serious, it does take up 3 magic slots. You're going to need at least 19 intelligence. And if you actually do want to use another spell, like a regular projectile, then you're going to have to spec into 24 or maybe 30 intelligence, or use the Ring of Magical Nature. But, like, leveling up in this game is, like, harder than the other games. And you also get 2 ring slots. Which I guess, like, my whole point is that you're going to have to sacrifice a lot just to use the spell. But another drawback this spell has is the fact that it consumes 100 MP, which means that every single time that you use Firestorm, you're going to have to use your spice to replenish your MP, which thankfully in this game you can buy an infinite amount for pretty cheap, which combined with the fact that you do have an MP bar and not limited attunement casts, you can just keep using it. Which honestly, I don't understand why some people actually like limited casts more than actually having an MP or an FP bar. You get so much more freedom, you can use your favorite spells as much as you want. It also makes challenge runs just more fun. I don't know, if you're a person that actually likes limited casts more, just let me know your opinions in the comments. But to get back to Pyromancies and the main reason as to why it's going to get lower on the list, there's only like 5 fire spells and you can only get 3 of them in regular New Game. You have to go to New Game Plus to get the rest of them. And all the projectile ones are just going to be outclassed by Soul Ray because that one just goes further than the rest, does like just as much damage as Fireball, but it only takes up 1 slot, consumes less MP as well. But in terms of Fire Spray, I actually do like that one. Fire Spray, you can strafe while using it, and that actually is pretty cool, especially for how MP efficient that it actually is. But the spell just does not stagger well, and the damage is going to suck against bosses or when you go into New Game Plus. Now the spell Ignite is basically going to be like your short range spell like Combustion or Catch Flame, and it performs so well, like incredibly fast. It does more damage than Soul Ray for the same MP cost, but unfortunately it takes up 2 slots, so trying to equip it alongside Firestorm or Soul Ray can be a problem. Also, an annoying thing about fire damage in general is that there are just a bunch of bosses that are just immune or resist to it, which I just hate when bosses are immune to a certain damage type. It should not be a thing. I hate it. I don't care if it makes logical sense. I don't like it. But overall, Demon Souls Pyromancies are very high damaging, but due to their lack of variety and how expensive they can be, they're just going to get lower on the list. Number 3, we have Dark Souls 3. Now this is probably the most fun Pyromancy type out of all the games, which if fun is the most important thing to you, then this is going to be number 1 on your list, because Pyromancies in this game has such amazing build synergy with so many different things. To start off with, this actually scales with Faith Intelligence. That means you have access to other types of spells, especially if you want to use the White Hair Talisman. Faith Int also gets dark damage too, which also to mention in this game, Black Flame Pyromancies deal dark damage, which is great if you're fighting bosses that are resist to fire. Also, the short range spells have good synergy with the Pyromancer's Parting Flame due to that lingering fire effect. And most importantly, the Demon Scar exists. The single most coolest weapon ever made. Just being able to have a good damaging weapon that can cast Pyromancies and not have the damage be complete ass is so amazing. It's just so fucking fun. But another thing that Pyromancies just do well in this game is how accessible everything is. The game has a Pyromancer starting class. Items to boost fire damage and casting speed are just very early on in the game. You can acquire all the Pyromancy tomes with just having to kill Vort or Abyss Watchers. Now unfortunately you need Carla to hand in a couple of these tomes, but it's still all available in the first half of the game. And also you can get the 3 best spells very early on as well. Great Combustion, Chaos Bed Vestiges, and Boulder Heave. Boulder Heave, how is Boulder Heave one of... It just is. It's fucking amazing. Look at this shit. It does so much poise damage, it can stagger enemies so quickly. A bunch of different bosses just get like stun locked. Against larger enemies in particular, it can actually hit them twice. So it can just like melt through health bars. Like look at what it does to the twin princes, the twin demon princes. They definitely do not like this. And even against Gale, look, it just stun locks the entire first phase. He just doesn't do anything the entire first phase. And on top of that, it does physical damage, which most enemies in the game are just weaker to physical compared to elemental. Now the major downside is going to be the casting speed and the distance. It just does not go that far at all. But in every other instance where this spell does not really shine, you just use Chaos Bed Vestiges because that spell is just ridiculous. It goes so far in a flat line, has a large AoE, it does so much damage. Now it does take up 2 slots and consume 35 FP, but it's still well worth it because the damage just is more than enough. Now I know, what is the catch? Why isn't Dark Souls 3 number 1? Well, one of the reasons is that the other Pyromancies on this list are just broken, but the main reason is that there's like 30 Pyromancies in this game, and 25 of them just suck, which I wouldn't be too mad about, but they're just so cool looking, and it just pisses me off. Bursting Fireball, mid. Great Chaos Fire Orb, outclassed. Fire Surge, mid, unless you're using it in PvP. Fire Whip, mid. Firestorm, Chaos Storm, mid. Sacred Flame, mid. Profaned Flame, mid. Poison Mist, Toxic Mist, they just suck because like every boss is just immune to poison. All these spells here are just very situational or just mid. Report, this one's cool. I like this one. It was much more improved over the Dark Souls 1 version, and some areas can be very cool with this one. So I'm not going to say anything bad about Report. Black Serpent, mid unless you're using it in PvP. Floating Chaos, Seething Chaos, mid. Flame Fan, it's good against smaller enemies that can get staggered. Everything else, mid. Why are a bunch of these spells so mediocre? I don't understand. I don't care if the game's 8 years old. Fix it now, please. Number 2, Dark Souls 1 Pyromancy is probably the most boring of all the Pyromancy types, for me at least, and that's because these spells have no requirements, no scalings, and combined with these spells doing massive damage, they can just be used with any type of build, which ultimately hurts the build creation. Me personally, I like to be meticulous in making builds, planning out my stat splits, figuring out the best combinations for infusions, spells, catalysts, but something like Pyromancies is just detached from all of that to the point where it hardly enhances build creation. Now obviously this is just a personal gripe that I have. Most other people might not share the same sentiment, but it's my list, so I get to say what I want. However, another reason as to why they're broken is because they only require souls to level up. Now, it does require a lot of souls, like roughly 150,000 to get to plus 15, and to get it to Ascended plus 5, you need a total of 340,000 souls. But honestly, just having a plus 10 flame is just more than enough damage to beat the game. But if you do find certain soul flying methods or just dupe some souls, then you can get a maxed out Pyromancy flame, which is essentially like a plus 21 flame. And this is just overkill, it's just like stupid damage. But even on top of all that, the spells are also extremely viable. Fire damage is probably the best damage type in the entire game. Spells don't consume any stamina. It also gets its own starting class, and everything that you need to make a good Pyromancy build is accessible very early on. Both the Pyromancy NPCs, the Bellowing Dragon Crest Ring, Great Chaos Fireball, Chaos Storm, Great Combustion, Power Within. You get all of this stuff within the first part of the game. Now, the obvious downside that people might think about Dark Souls on Pyromancies is that it doesn't scale with anything, so therefore in later new games means that your damage is going to be pretty poor, right? Nope. It literally doesn't matter. Here's me fighting a DLC boss on New Game Plus 7. It still does stupid damage, because Power Within is a spell that exists, and this thing gives you faster stamina recovery speed and 40% more damage to all sources. And did I mention that it doesn't have any requirements, so you can just pair it with any type of build? Now, you also might be thinking about how it has limited casts like it does on Dark Souls 2, but it doesn't matter when you're just doing stupid damage and just melting all the bosses in the game. And even then, you still get more casts on average compared to Dark Souls 2. But the actual downsides that Pyromancies have in this game is that 1, the projectiles don't go very far at all, so trying to snipe enemies is just not going to work. 2, the casting speed scales off dexterity and you only start to benefit at 35 dex, which is just weird to me. I much prefer casting speed tied to attunement, like how it was in Dark Souls 2. I don't know what the purpose is of having it be tied to dexterity. If you do have your own opinions as to why that is the case and why it's better that way, let me know down below. But downside number 3, there are just a few bosses that are just straight up immune to fire damage, which sucks. But there is a spell in Black Flame that actually does do split physical damage, of which you actually can damage these bosses with this Pyromancy. But even then, it's still not going to be a good option against these bosses. When I did my Pyromancy only run, I literally did send skip just to get to the DLC early to be able to use Black Flame against Quelaag, but even with all the buffs, it still wasn't enough damage. But overall, Dark Souls on Pyromancies are definitely broken. Number 1, Elden Ring. Now, yes, they are technically not Pyromancies, but comparing all the Pyromancies is useless anyway, and we just do it for fun, so who cares? But Elden Ring spells are just always going to be the best. There's so much variety. A lot of these spells are fun, and most of them are viable. They can all do amazing damage because there's like 1,000 different things in this game that can just boost spells, like Talismans, Wondrous Flask, Ashes of War, other spells, and even certain types of seals and staffs. And also to mention, this game fleshed out the fully charging spells mechanic, and there's like so many different ways to regenerate your FP. But to talk about the Pyromancies in particular, or just the fire spells, you just have so much stuff. Fire Monk spells, Fire Giant spells, Frenzied Flame, Black Flame, Blood Flame, and even if you want to include the Lava and Ghost Flame spells, you can do that too. But even if you're just to talk about the regular fire spells, like just like the basic orange ones and the Black Flame spells, don't have to include the rest of them. Just talking about those in particular, it's still going to be the best, because not only are they just very high damaging, but it's so easy to build around. Everything that you need for a Fire Faith build is right at the beginning. The Faith and Fire Crystal Tears, Fire Scorpion Charm, Faithful Canvas Talisman, Godslayer Seal, and even the best Pyromancy in the game, Catch Flame. You literally start off with this spell, and it's just amazing. This thing essentially works like a short range weapon with its like running and jumping attacks, but it just gets like 5 times as much damage as like most smaller weapons in the game. And it just consumes such like little FP. But to talk about the other options, Black Flame spells are also very early on, and these have actually gone back to just doing regular fire damage, but now they just have a percentile damage over time, to the point to where if you just hit any boss around 30 times, they just flat out die. Doesn't matter how much faith or incan scaling you have, it will just always do that good damage. And probably the best support spell to have, Flame Grant Me Strength, is also very early on. Now it's no Power Within, but it still gives you a solid 20% boost to damage and stamina recovery speed, but it also just has no downsides. There's no health penalty, it can be stacked with other buffs, and it also gets very low requirements. And also, Firestorm has been restored to its former glory in the form of Burno Flame. This spell, although somewhat outclassed by Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, it can still fuck shit up, especially when fully charged. But the only real downsides I can say about the fire spells in this game is that they did lose that cool Faith int scaling that it had previously, and fire damage is just not the greatest in this game. A lot of bosses are resist to it, and there are plenty of areas of which where it's just raining or there's lots of water around, which can result in like 10 to 20% less damage. But there's still amazing options, and it definitely is deserving of the #1 spot. But that is the video completed. As always, please do like and subscribe, and just let me know down in the comments what your opinions are. The next marathon will most likely end up being a miracle-based marathon that I'm probably starting today. So definitely check me out live on Twitch, because I am live there every single day doing all these different types of challenge runs and marathons. But yeah, catch you guys in the next one. See ya.